All right, we are live. Welcome to the Difference Makers podcast presented by WODProof. Today we have with us John Singleton, who's the head coach of the training program. He's coached to two of the fittest women on earth, Jacqueline Dahlstrom and Gabrielle Magala. And over the past few years, he's taken over 30 athletes to the CrossFit Games, including teens, masters, and individuals. So welcome to the show, John.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Justin.
So tell me a little bit about your past. We've got a pretty good list of athletes that you've taken to the games over the years. How did you get started within the CrossFit space?
So when I first started, it's a long time ago now. I don't like to think that far back, but it's like in 2007, 2008. And I was doing my master's degree in London.
Okay.
And the CrossFit world back then was very different. It was there was literally one box in London that was from where we were studying was quite far away. So it's basically me and a friend would go to a park with a kettlebell, run around the park, and then do some kettlebell swings, and that was kind of what it was. And then the competitions back then, I kind of got involved as wanting to be a competitor. That's where I was, and basically the competitions were like held in car parks. They were very old school, and I remember saying to my friend, actually, it's like, this CrossFit thing's never going to take on. I was stressed about the growth, and I think when Reebok came on board, you had that. It was like a stark change. Things just like shot forward and moved forward. So that was kind of like when I started, I suppose like 13, 14 years ago, somewhere around that time. And
Wow.
so it seemed like, it's been fun being involved in the evolution of the sport since then as well.
Yeah. So 2008, 2009, you've been around since like pretty much the beginning.
Yeah, well, it's especially beginnings in Europe, watching the games and the old school documentaries. That was like, following CrossFit Journal and all these things. Yeah, there was definitely very much a movement at that time that was fun to be a part of.
Definitely was. I don't think so. I've been involved since about 2011. So a little bit later than that. And just even the evolution since then is incredible.
Yeah, I think I don't realize there was a competition we went to, and it had an event with like burpees over the wall.
Yeah.
And there was like kind of similar to an old games event. And I went back and watched some of the old games videos, and I think, to really appreciate the evolution, like put the 2008, 2009 games, and then just see the difference in the athletes compared to now. And it really, that's very eye-opening. The weight that they move, the way they form gymnastics, the conditioning capacity that they have, that everything has got significantly better.
Oh, significantly better. Now, this is just a funny thought, but do you think that any of the athletes who participated in the 2020 games could just go back and win? You take them out, you transplant them into 2009 even? You think they could just pick up and win?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's yes. I mean, you would fancy that anyone competing at the games this year could have probably won through those years. I mean, there's always the classic video like of Jason Khalipa doing Isabel, like with the 60 kilo snatches and struggling with ring muscle ups, which is just, he's obviously in that time was the best athlete in the world. He's won the games, and to transfer that across to now, like it's just night and day comparison.
Absolutely. So now your program, the program, you guys, when did you start the program, and what spurred the start of that?
So the program started in around, I think, like 2015, something like that. And basically we were working with small groups of athletes, and they started to do very well at competition. And so we wanted to put something together that was, kind of a name for what we were doing. And I was working with a lot of Icelandic athletes at the time, and so that we had this idea of, it kind of refers back to the old school days of CrossFit with Mikko's sisu.
Yep.
And there's like kind of an Icelandic word called eltmur, which is very similar meaning sisu. So we wanted to call the program eltmur. And I'd be going around and going, oh, we're thinking of releasing this program called Elmer, and everyone would be like, Elmer what? And no one understood the word.
No.
And so the program just stuck. And then we were, we need Instagram. And so then we tried to find the program on Instagram, and there was no the program available. So we just took away the A.
Yeah.
And that kind of that stuck since then. So that was in 2015. And in essence, it was just like, it kind of became a bit of a name for what we were doing back then.
Yeah.
And since has grown, our focus at the start was with elite athletes, and since we've incorporated more coaches, we work a lot more broadly now with kind of the whole CrossFit spectrum of athletes.
Awesome. Yeah, that's kind of the natural evolution, I think, of a lot of these programs, is they don't just stay within the elite. It starts to branch off when people start to become interested, and they'd like to follow along the athletes that you're working with, and they see what they're achieving, and they want to achieve similar things. So then they start to find programs like yourself.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Like, we had as we started with just one program for elite athletes, a lot of people wanted to kind of be involved in the journey of the athletes as well and follow along. Yeah. But obviously the elite programming is not for everyone. And so we needed options that allowed people to join in. Like myself, I still love training. I still love, staying healthy, staying fit. And I'm nowhere near the capacity that I once was. And so, it realized to me as well, we have like something called the program 60 now, which is for 60 minutes of work.
Yep.
Right, you kind of follow along, get the same feeling of the journey of the athletes, but you're not in the gym all day having to do complex movements, lift heavy weights, etc. So kind of evolution from that.
Yeah, I think that evolution too helps with making people involved with the program and being able to engage with what you're doing, no matter what their experience level.
Yeah, exactly. We have our own style, we have our own thought processes, and so it does allow people to kind of be involved in the community in that way by doing what we believe is the right way to do things.
Yeah. What are some of your challenges that you have with coaching athletes, or so many athletes, remotely?
Yeah, so I a few years ago I made a switch to just working with kind of in-person athletes. So I live in Mallorca, Spain.
Okay.
And the reason was, I wasn't doing a good enough job online. So, I'm just better in person.
Yeah.
And so for kind of communicating and speaking with the athletes, so we brought on like kind of a tier of coaches online who work with our athletes as well. And then the athletes who live in Mallorca, I then will coach.
Okay.
So I actually reduced quite a lot the number of athletes that I would coach and directly, and just started to work in person with them. And then I've been lucky enough that we have a great team of coaches that then can kind of manage the athletes online as well.
Awesome. So when you say you coaching athletes directly in person, does that include Jacqueline and Gabby? Because I know you guys did a farm training camp leading up to the games in 2020.
Yeah.
So does that include those girls, or?
Exactly. So currently we have, so the season might change a little bit. In essence, we have Jacqueline, Gabby, and Gabby's boyfriend, Christoph, living here. And so those three athletes are the three athletes that I'm currently coaching. And then I assist with, we actually had 15 athletes qualify for the semi-finals this year.
Awesome.
And then I work with our other coaches to have more of an overview role, but the other coaches can be more involved and give more direct feedback. So it means that I can be a part of the journey, but I'm not necessarily the person that's there every day. Working through that. But so we have the three athletes who made the move to live here through. And like you say, during lockdown, Spain was quite at the start. Spain was quite hard hit, and they went very strict in terms of what we were allowed to do. So we literally, you couldn't go to a gym. There was no option for that. So we're lucky enough that the gym where we train in C23, they lent us some equipment, and Jacqueline and I live on a farm, so we made the farm into. I loved it. It's the type of training that I really enjoy. So it was kind of perfect for me and the style of training that we typically enjoy. So it was good fun.
That's awesome. So the farm, so you guys just brought everybody there. You guys did your training camp there.
Exactly. It became, so when they first announced the lockdown, they're like, okay, 2 weeks. And, then every 2 weeks they go on and on and on. So we end up being there for months. A 2-week training camp turned into months of months-long training camp. And that kind of reflected the season. The goal, the hurdle always moved because you never knew what was happening. So you always had to adapt. You always had to change. And, you mentally prepared for 2 weeks. Then it was another 2 weeks. And then you kind of go, well, okay, this is taking longer. And then you kind of go for months. And now we're in the term where we're kind of moving into COVID's affecting things for at least a couple of years now.
Yeah. No, it definitely is. And right now in Spain, everything's kind of loosened back up for you guys a little bit, or where are you guys at with everything right now?
Yeah, so we live on a small island, and so that's meant that it's been easy to control the spread of COVID.
Yeah.
The big thing is the island relies on tourism, and so if tourists can't come in, not much money comes into the island.
Yeah.
And so they've been playing with this balance between allowing tourists in and just keeping the island functioning and running as it is. But we've been lucky to live in a small place during this time.
Yeah. I'm in a similar position to you where it's on a small island, but it's an island. So it's a little bit, I'm in Victoria, BC.
Okay,
so
nice.
On the West Coast. So I get to be near some of the great Canadian athletes. Patrick Vellner's on the island. Adam Davidson's on the island. So I got to be with them while they did their quarterfinals and their semifinals. And Emily Rolfe lives really close, so she was here as well. So that was a pretty cool experience to see those three athletes do the semifinals and the quarterfinals together.
Yeah, I know. I imagine it's quite a beautiful place. It's somewhere I've always wanted to go.
Hey, you're always welcome. Come on out. We have some great gyms here. Yeah, so your team that you brought to the games this year, you had, like I said, Jackie and Gabby, both competing as individual women. Do you find it difficult to coach both simultaneously when they're competing against each other or in the same events at the same time? How do you balance that?
It's a very good question, and something that I think is an evolving process.
Yeah.
And so basically, it's an interesting thing because I truly believe that when the athletes are training together, they help one another to get to a further level. So I think that this kind of group training is crucial.
Yeah.
Obviously, individual athletes are very competitive. And so you have this dynamic where everyone wants to win. So there's been like an evolution process, of understanding that, training's training and competing's competing. I think I'm quite good at being able to separate the, for me, I want both athletes to do their best. And that's my mindset going in. It's like, when you get onto the competition floor, you perform to the best of your abilities, and then the result is the result. So aside from the physical development, we have had to, together as a group, both me as a coach and the athletes in of themselves, have had to kind of develop and evolve to have a bigger mindset and a mindset of more kind of abundance and growth rather than just be narrowly focused on just me doing my own thing. It's like, how can I use this environment to my advantage?
Yeah. Awesome. Definitely an interesting thing that you said there, training versus competing. When that's always something that sticks in my mind in the CrossFit space of like preparing your athletes to compete through their training and not have them competing every day, especially when they're at high levels like that. How do you balance that dynamic out with your athletes?
So it's an interesting debate because in the training, depending obviously on the type of training, but it's very important that the athletes kind of reach those thresholds and push hard.
Yeah.
I actually think it's more the mental drain of the competition. That's the kind of difference. So the training intensity, sometimes we do want to reach a similar level that we will be in competition, but we don't necessarily want that mental drain and that hyper focus of the competition setting, because that can be very intense, very, very stressful. If we, the athletes, were to do those 15 events at the gym, how they feel afterwards would probably feel very different, even though they reached the same scores. Just because, like, standing next to the athletes, having the cameras on you, all these perceived pressures. And so I think it's managing that mental strain of the constantly feeling like you're competing becomes very important. It's understanding that actually, I'm training to better myself, even though I'm pushing. I'm not competing against the person next to me, and I'm using kind of that group environment to my own advantage.
And we're starting to see, I think, a lot of that with these training camps starting to pop up within the CrossFit space.
I think it's something that we have worked towards, and now we're starting to see like lots of groups. Obviously you have like CompTrain, Proven, Training Think Tank. These groups of athletes starting to come together and move as a group. And I truly, that's the reason that we've worked towards this and wanted this to happen, is because I do believe that the athletes who are involved in this group become stronger because they do have like support and there's constant motion going forward. So, you will obviously see these outliers who are able to do things by themselves. Now, I think the male division always highlighted that. They had like Froning and Fraser who are very independent, standalone athletes, and so they kind of set a trend of doing things by yourself and being very independent.
Yeah.
I do believe for the majority of athletes that this kind of group environment can be very beneficial to kind of exploring the true potential of the athlete.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, the male versus the female. You are right. Like, looking back, I think at about the top 5 male versus the top 5 female, I think the top 5 males were all people who trained individually, just by themselves. They don't really have a training camp that they train with regularly.
Yeah.
Where in the top 5 females, there's more that are part of the training camp.
Yeah, if you look back through it, you had like Froning, Graham Holmberg, Ben Smith, Matt Fraser as kind of the champions, and all of those have really been independent athletes. I believe they've always had like support from coaches, but really when you speak to them or follow the story, they always like the independent route that they've worked themselves. But then in the female world, you've very much had more coaching presence for the female athletes.
Right. And do you take that into consideration as a coach yourself?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So my kind of take on it now is that if an athlete wants to get to the best level of the sport and they don't have a support team, which should really involve some kind of coaching figure, then they're really not optimizing things. It's like you're having to organize everything yourself, just from a logistics standpoint. It's like having someone there to support you, make sure you're eating, or have an overview of your training, make sure that you are doing things you should do, is so crucial. And I think the sport's got to that stage now where that support team is kind of needed for you to be your best.
Right on. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is that need for that support. So thinking of kind of the next generation of athletes that are up and coming, what type of advice would you give them if they want to kind of break through from being, your kind of topper, somebody who's ready to kind of make a step towards a higher level of fitness?
So I think it's the biggest thing I think for the younger generation is finding consistency. So if you can be consistent through, and then really, actually taking a bit of a step back and identifying, why am I doing this? Why do I want to compete? Why do I want to go to the CrossFit Games? Why do I want to be the best athlete I can be? Kind of using that why and identifying that understanding of moving forward is very important, because that's then going to allow the consistency to happen. Because, you know, ultimately it might take a few years to get there. And when you're 18, you know, 3 years seems like a lifetime away. Whereas, you know, as you get older, those 3 years start accelerating a lot quicker.
Yeah.
But so I think that if the younger generation really identify, why am I doing this, and identify those reasons, and if they are strong, like a strong why, that will really help you move forward through the consistency and the time over what is relatively short period of time, but when you're at that age seems like a very long time.
Yeah, I think that is hard for them to see, is that preparation, or the time it takes from them to get to where they are now to the games, maybe a 2 to 5 year plan. And that doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily just,
it's
it's
true,
something you have to believe in.
and you just can't. You know, consistency is so crucial. Like I've been lucky enough to work with. You know, I would say that from teenagers, I've been able to work with probably some of the most talented teenagers that you know have potential to win the games. You know, just crazy talented teens. But the hard thing in that age group is seeing them through the years. You know, they see their friends partying, they see their friends. They go to uni. A lot of them have experienced the games as a teen and don't necessarily have that same drive to experience as an adult. So, you know, ironically, you know, there's that the cliche saying of hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard, and I think it's very true, especially in that teenage group. If you can stay consistent in your training and you can have a bit more of a long-term focus, then you'll be surprised what they're able to achieve, even though some of their peers may be more talented.
Definitely, I agree with you there. I think just putting in that, like you said, consistency and time within the sport, like, hey, you just got to work. And coming from other sports as well, I've seen some of the most talented athletes on the teams. I come from a baseball background, that just given talent, they are the best on the field. And then you see them the moment they step off the field and they're done. They don't put that extra work in. They just rely on what they are capable of. And that's often the downfall of a lot of these guys.
Yeah, no, I think that a lot more talented athletes fall through the cracks in CrossFit because there's not the support network. You know, like if you take like a European soccer scenario, kids will be scouted from the age of 8 years old, 6 years old, and they'll work through the ranks. So, you know, if that kid has talent, there's no way the football team is going to let them fall through the cracks. They're going to support them and they're going to make sure that they're there, they turn up to training, etc. And CrossFit just, you know, it just doesn't have that same support network. So you then start relying on the families, the friends, and it gets extremely hard to maintain that talent within the sport.
That's an interesting concept. You're right. There isn't that kind of scouting process to move these athletes through the sport of CrossFit. But I guess that's also because it's such a new sport in the big picture, where,
you know, and it's also a funding issue. You know, like the top 40, you know, athletes, majority of those athletes, the best 40 athletes in the world, a lot of them will have lost money going to the games. You know, so that's a really tough scenario to be in.
Yeah, this is still seen as a sport that's used to train for other sports.
Yeah.
As opposed to being a sport in itself.
Yeah.
And I guess, how would you like to see that change for your athletes or athletes within the sport?
So I do think that it is important. You know, obviously the sport needs to grow and develop from where it is now. That consistent growth needs to happen. I think that competitions like Rogue, Dubai, WODProof, you know, these key kind of off-season competitions really help make sure that happens, because they start to put a bit more money into the sport that would support those top-level athletes. they get more exposure to different markets. You know, Rogue is obviously very much involved, and although it had a very CrossFit roots, you know, now it's open to such a wide audience that gets exposure into seeing CrossFitters do other things. And I think,
Yeah.
you know, the games being on ESPN or the channels that it's on, these things really help give athletes exposure, and therefore they're able to make a living from the sport.
You know what I just noticed last night was that ESPN put out a post on their Instagram of Annie Thorsdottir hitting that 200-pound snatch from the games this year. But ESPN isn't the broadcaster for the games.
Okay. Yeah,
So
I lost track of the. Who was it? Is it CBS?
yeah, in North America, it's CBS.
Okay.
So, but I just thought that was interesting because they're pushing that content out there, and that's helping to promote the sport. And that was probably one of the highlight moments for the games this year, was just that.
Yeah, you know, and it's a great narrative that, you know, Annie
Mhm.
comes back after giving birth and is able to compete and place third amongst the best in the world. And you know, I think the snatch was it's like the perfect social media clip to highlight that. You know, it's short,
Yeah,
it shows what's happened, it shows the emotion, and
yeah,
so it really ticks a lot of boxes for promoting the sport in that way.
100%. And it's good to see that is starting to come back into the fold, as opposed to some of the things that have been highlighted by social media about CrossFit in the past.
Yes, yeah. I think, you know, I think it becomes our job to give a positive narrative for the sport as well. You know, ultimately we help spread the message of the sport. You know, we want the sport to grow. You know, I don't follow any other sports. You know, I really just I just follow CrossFit. You know,
Yeah,
CrossFit it really becomes your world. You know, like everyone I speak to is somewhat involved in CrossFit. You know, there's like
yeah,
and it's a small world, but it becomes very all encompassing once you're involved in it.
yeah. You start to see a lot of little things everywhere that are all tied back into the sport. And
Yeah.
I 100% agree with you, where there was a point where like my whole world was like, okay, we're gonna go to the CrossFit gym. We come home, it's on Instagram, and then we're watching content. Hey, speaking of content, the program's doing a great job of pushing YouTube content out on a regular basis.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we really wanted to make a move to kind of showcase what we're doing, you know, in a bit more long video format, and I think we have a fun group, and we have a fun message that we want to put out there about how we train, how we want to get better. So that was one of the big focuses, and we're lucky enough to have Alex kind of come out and live with us. So you know, it's not the most easy thing for a media person to join in the journey. You know, like
Yeah.
filming the athletes all day, training, eating, sleeping, and so we're really lucky to have Alex come over, and we've had a few other guys helping us, like Josie, to create some content.
Yeah. That change, what has that done for your program from an engagement standpoint from the community, or even from having eyes on your program and having new athletes come in to join the program? Have you seen a big uptick in engagement with the training program itself?
So I don't think there's necessarily like a direct correlation in terms of, you know, you get lots more views, lots more signups. It doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily happen in that way.
Yeah.
But I think what it does, it allows people to get to know us a bit more and get to
Mhm.
know the people behind the program, who you'll be speaking to, the athletes that we have. And so it gives the people that are on board a bit more a connection to us in a way. You know, we can reach out to that audience. We can let them know our thoughts, why we're doing stuff, how we're doing stuff. And so that connection's created in a way that we haven't been able to do before.
Yeah. I can see that. And the nice thing is, from North America, I never really paid too close of attention to the European athletes in the market. So, going to the games and seeing these high level performances from Gabby and Jacqueline, and then you start to go back and look and watch some of this content. You're like, oh, they're pretty legit. Like from North America, though, we don't get that exposure to them because I don't know, everything's very
This is one
focused around here.
thing we've always struggled with. So a lot of information travels from the US to Europe, but actually very little information travels the opposite way.
Yeah.
And I think it changed. Like, Iceland's obviously had a big effect on that.
Yes.
I think Annie and Katrin are both a lot more Americanized than, say, someone like Sarah, who's a lot more European. But on the male side, it's been since Mikko Salo, who a lot of people don't remember anymore. It's been dominated by US guys.
Yeah.
And on the female side, you've had you've obviously had like Tia, obviously from Australia, and then lots of European females who've been at the top. But when they typically start to get exposure, they kind of move to America. Tia being a good example, Katrin being a good example. So they kind of move into the North American fold rather than bringing the attention over to Europe.
Yeah, that's Australia too. Yeah, because there's so many great athletes. Like you look at the leaderboard this year, it's not just
9 out of the top 20 were European females, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And European. So back in the day, like European regionals for females it was just super intense. Like getting through as a female in Europe is no easy feat. It's like you really have to fight to get through. The guys, it's nice to see some of the guys starting to push through. And Björgvin obviously has been like super consistent.
Yeah.
But the depth of the guys from Europe has not been there in the same way. Like the depth of the European females is kind of like, it's just like without question the kind of strongest region for the females to come from.
Yeah. Now, why do you think that might be? Do you think that might be from a strength and conditioning standpoint of sports, like developmental sports, or what the athletes are training for in the developmental years, more football as opposed to American football?
So I think it's a cultural aspect that in Northern Europe, Scandinavian females especially are, they're female Vikings.
Yeah.
and that shows through. Like, they're very competitive. They don't see themselves as anything less physically than the males, and so that cultural aspect transfers very well to the sport of CrossFit, where in essence you're doing there's no difference in the sport. It's just as exciting to watch the females as it is the males, sometimes more. And they're doing exactly the same thing. Like there's no shortening of the swim kayak for the females. They do exactly the same. The run toes to bar is exactly the same. And you'll get instances of Tia beat probably like most of the guys on the field. So I think but the Scandinavian females are used to that kind of equality a lot more of beating guys.
Mm-hmm.
I have zero ego about being beaten by females now. Like I'm at the point where I will scale the female weights in order to compete because there's they're better than me. It's just the way it is.
It is the way it is. The evolution of the sport, where like the weights that the expectation for the male and female have become very impressive.
Yeah, the weights that these athletes lift is just so significant, and across most things. This year's games, I would say, was it was probably biased towards the stronger individuals.
Yeah,
the way it was, and so everything as well was kind of coupled with something heavy. That was most of the events kind of favored that aspect of things.
Now, overall, from a training standpoint, do you think that that's something you can prepare your athletes for better in the future? Or do you feel like you've done a good job of preparing for that, where the high skilled gymnastics are paired with a heavy implement? So like pig flip and the rope climbs, or the heavy deadlifts and the freestanding handstand push-ups. Like, You had to be good at one to be able to do the other, to even have a chance to do the other.
So I think that, we actually, one of our core principles of programming is the kind of Dave Castro effect,
Mm-hmm.
where you never know what you're going to get. One
Yeah.
year, the programming may be heavily biased towards body weight gymnastics and running.
Yep.
One year it might be heavily biased to a heavy barbell, and you don't know that.
No.
So we do hold the approach. We don't try and second guess what things are going to be. This year, we had a very short time between semis and games to kind of go into the games prep, which typically, this year we wouldn't have seen any swimming or longer biking or things like that. So
Yeah.
the exposure to those events and also the odd object, a semi-final environment, it's harder to be exposed to some kind of odd object. So I think from our standpoint, we could have included more of the games training if we had known that the athletes are going to qualify. But there's no guarantee. As we said, like European, what's now semi-finals for females is the hardest. So there's no guarantee that they're going to get back. It's not a walk in the park. So
No.
you need to make sure that they're prepared for that.
Did you find any added challenges that the semifinals were all online this year?
Yeah.
For Europe? Like, what were the added challenges for you, and how did you manage those? Because there were 2 European semifinals.
Yeah.
Did you choose to put your athletes in the same ones, different ones? Like, I guess there's a lot to unpack with that.
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack. We had a lot of females in Europe. In essence, so as a bit of background, we did not know what's going to be online and what's going to be live, and the weekends were originally at different times. So, I tried to not interfere in those decisions and kind of laid it out as what would be optimal for you and how would you feel, and kind of the athletes let that go. Especially with Jack and Gabby, they're very different athletes. Gabby typically kind of stronger, bigger frame, whereas Jacqueline lighter, like body weight gymnastics. So the programming affects their performance. Tia, I think, is probably the only person in the world where programming is irrelevant. She'll still win. And Fraser was the same guy. The programming was irrelevant to Fraser. He still won. Whereas once you move from Tia and Fraser, the programming does matter.
Yes.
So in essence, they could choose what they wanted to do for semis. When they announced it was online, it became a big issue for us because we're in Spain.
Yeah.
And we know that temperature has a huge effect on performance. So that weekend was like, I don't know in Fahrenheit, but in degrees centigrade, it's like 33 to 35 degrees centigrade, which I presume is like 90s, 100.
Somewhere between 85 and 90, I believe.
Okay, yeah. So it's hot. And basically, we then needed to find a location that the heat wasn't going to be as much of a factor. So that actually meant kind of becoming like an event organizer. And obviously, you don't know what the events are because they don't release anything. So you have lots of contingency plans in place to make sure that the girls could perform. And so this year, not only you're coaching, you're also becoming an event organizer at the same time to make sure they have an optimal environment to go through.
Yeah. So where did you end up doing the semifinals? Was it in Spain?
Yeah, we would move to an air-conditioned Globo gym. Like, luckily, I have a very good friend on the island called Javi, who is the manager at this. It's actually the biggest gym in Europe. It's called Megasport. Okay. And they have an air-conditioned kind of cross-training facility, and so we could go in there. But they didn't have all the right equipment, so we had to. The ring muscle-ups, for example, we had to drill into the wall of this Globo gym, and and it all happened so last minute. So actually, semis became very stressful. I have no desire to do that again next year.
Well, fingers crossed we don't have to go down that road.
Yeah.
Before we wrap it up, how do you plan your season with regards to training your weaknesses for your athletes and preparing, your athletes for the season ahead? You know, we know a little bit of some of these events that are going to come up and some of these, we'll call it independent events. Are you preparing for those? Do you train to use those to work on weaknesses, or how are you planning for your athletes in a season?
So this is one of the things with CrossFit, you know, like we have been through so many changes. Eventually, we started to see a pattern. You know, it's like, okay, open, regionals, games, and it was all in these similar times. Then all of a sudden, and that wasn't always established. You know, that just became maybe 4 or 5 years of consistency. Like, okay, this is how it's going to be. And then CrossFit go, okay, we're taking the open now to whenever it was, October, and then we're doing this. We're having like the national champions, and then we're having, you know, these sanctioned events, and then we're having this. So it's like there's been no consistency in timeline, which has made specific, unless you know you're an athlete that is going to like qualify for the games easily, it's made the programming for the athletes very challenging, and you have to be very adaptable. So the one thing that we are really hoping for is that we get a consistent season, meaning that there is now this like same format. We know that, okay, the Open's going to start in February, great, and the Games is going to be somewhere towards the end of July. And that allows us to kind of program around the biggest competitions of the year. And then we can use the bigger off-season competitions as like a little bit of a testing ground to see that the off-season training is going right. And, you know, it's not necessarily that they have to be in their best shape for those off-season competitions. It's more just a little bit of a proving of where they are. And the off-season does give you more abilities to work on weaknesses without knowing that you're going to have to perform in one area at 100%, you know. Be that an athlete that needs to work on their pulling gymnastics, an athlete that needs to work on their overall strength, wherever they may fall, they do have more of an opportunity to do that in the off season.
Yeah, good. What challenges do you see with this kind of upcoming season? What are you guys planning for your athletes, or what's the kind of the next step for you guys after seeing the evolution of the games in 2021? What's up for the program in 2022?
So we, you know, for Gabby and Jacqueline, the idea is very much the same, to get that performance at the games and look to improve. We also have like an underlying level of very good athletes that we would like to see maybe some of them break through to the next stage. And then there's also the possibility of looking at a team. In 2019, when they had the super team format, we qualified a team for the games. But with all the hassle of COVID and moving it back to the affiliate cup, we decided not to take that route last year. But the question is, do we now pursue putting a team in the games as well to kind of, you know, cover those aspects of having both individual and team?
Now, would you like to see the reintroduction of the super teams, or do you think we should see the?
I think everyone, you know, I suppose I see the concept of the affiliate cup, but I kind of think that could be done through the open, you know, like have the fittest gym open participation. Like, I really don't think, you know, the irony of the affiliate cup is it's won by CrossFit Mayhem, who puts together a super team each year, you know, so it's like the whole ethos of the affiliate cup is defeated because everyone who's there is actually not everyone, but, you know, people move all round to form super teams.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not true affiliate teams. It's just they have to come under, follow this rule. So I kind of think, like, let's just take away this rule. Let's make it open, and then it becomes a lot easier to manage. You know, otherwise we have to have all the athletes move over to Mallorca for 6 months, 8 months of the year, actually, that to allow that to happen, and that becomes a big financial stress for everyone involved. Whereas with the super team, you're like, okay, you know, you guys, you have your family, your work, your job, you can stay there and train. We get together. And the more you get together, obviously, the bigger the advantage. So the teams who do train together will still have that advantage, but it allows more excitement bigger names, etc., to enter into the team department. So I personally think the super teams were a great addition, and it was sad to see them taken away.
I think we had some of the most interesting years of team competition with those super teams being present.
Yeah,
There
it was great.
Yeah, there was a handful of teams fighting for championship where in the past, with just the affiliate cup, we're only seeing 1 or 2 real competitors.
Yeah, and you have a lot of superstars of CrossFit who maybe, they are the superstars, but maybe not the best performing athletes who fit perfectly into the team environment. And therefore the fans love it, getting to see the exposure of their favorite athletes, the athletes who they follow the journey, who aren't at the games as individuals, but can be there as teams. And that then puts more eyes onto the team competition as well.
100%. Couldn't agree with you more.
So yeah, we'll see what happens. I have no idea what they're going to do.
Who knows? Well, hopefully we see some good positive changes come. We saw some great things come from 2022 and the evolution to 2021, 2020 to 2021. So hopefully we see another evolution going forward to 2022.
Yeah.
But on that note, before we wrap up, where can everybody find you? Tell us a little bit more.
The easiest place. So we have lots of kind of media channels going out. The easiest is to look for the program without an A on Instagram. And we'll come up. We have, as you mentioned, YouTube channel. We have informative newsletters. But kind of as an easy starting point, just check out the program without an A on Instagram, and you can find us there.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, guys. Go on, subscribe. We'll have lots more coming from the difference makers coming soon. Thanks again, John.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hit that like button and subscribe down below for more content coming soon from WODProof.